So you entered the United States on the Visa Waiver Program, also called ESTA, and now you've either married a U.S. citizen or you're thinking about marrying a U.S. citizen. And you want to know, can you apply for adjustment of status, also called a green card application, based on that marriage? The answer is maybe, but the details are pretty important. Let's start with ESTA. People refer to ESTA or the Visa Waiver Program as a tourist visa, but that's definitely not right. ESTA is defined completely differently under the immigration statute from tourist visas. One of the limitations of the ESTA program is that you cannot enter the U.S. and then apply for adjustment of status. That's the general rule. Now, there is an exception for the immediate relative category. Immediate relatives include those who are married to U.S. citizens. So, looks like maybe you can adjust. But this is only half the question. Basically, it's like asking, can this airplane fly? We've just said, yes, it has wings. Great. Well, you might also want to ask, does it have an engine? Well, one of these other important questions is, what was that person's intention when they came to the U.S.? This is called the question of immigrant intent. When somebody enters on ESTA, they've made an implied promise to the U.S. government that they will go back at the conclusion of the 90-day period of authorized stay. So if you've made that promise to the government, and then you turn around and you apply for permanent residency, that raises a question with the government about what your intention was when you told them that you were going to go back after 90 days. So first of all, if you are in your home country, considering coming to the U.S. on ESTA, and then filing an adjustment of status application, don't do it. That's not what the ESTA program is intended for. If you are already considering permanent residency, entering on ESTA is not the correct route. But let's say you've already entered the U.S. You still need to ask whether there are factors in your case that would lead the government to conclude that you made the decision to seek residency before you ever left. Because if you left with the intention of seeking residency, you've got a problem. The government could conclude that you've committed an act of fraud and you could be permanently barred from the U.S. So, yes, potentially ESTA to adjustment, but be very careful with those intent issues. Another issue that comes up here is somebody who stayed past the 90-day window of authorized stay. Can that person adjust status? Again here, potentially yes, but you need to be very careful because you can get penalties levied against you for staying past that 90-day window. First of all, if you've ever had a removal or deportation order, you can't file adjustment of status from that 90-day overstay. Secondly, if you're being investigated for an issue of public safety concern, that would be a DUI, for example, you cannot apply for adjustment of status. Thirdly, if there are security-related or fraud concerns in your case, you're not eligible to adjust. So remember what we were just saying about fraud and immigrant intent. If the government decides that you've been lying to them about what your intentions were when you came to the U.S., for example, they can both deny your adjustment of status application and make a fraud finding that permanently bars you from the U.S. Bottom line here is yes, potentially you can go from ESTA to adjustment of status, but these are cases you need to be really careful with because of that fraud bar that could permanently make you ineligible to be in the U.S. If there's ever a case that merited sitting down for a consultation with an attorney, this is probably that sort of case. Remember that even if you ultimately decide you can't pursue adjustment of status, there's another way to go with a marriage-based residency application, and that's through the U.S. consulate in your home country. It can be a lengthier process, but it starts with your U.S. spouse filing the I-130 petition, and once that's approved, you can eventually apply for a visa in your home country. So if you decide that ESTA is not the appropriate strategy for you, there is this other route available.